The orc arrived at the ranch carrying nothing but an old letter from her father. But when the rancher read those words, he made a decision that changed both of their lives in that very moment. The letter was folded in 3 places, worn soft from being held too many times. Lyra had read it so often she could recite every word by memory. Still, she pressed it against her chest as she walked the last stretch of road toward the Willow River, as if the paper itself could hold her together. Her boots were wrong for this kind of ground. The mud pulled at every step. Her bag cut into her shoulder, and somewhere behind her, in a small room at Martha Whitaker's boarding house, a debt kept growing. She had 3 days. 3 days before Martha stopped being patient. The morning air carried the smell of pine and cold water. The land here was beautiful in a way that almost hurt to look at. Wide open sky, tall grass pressed flat by a week of hard wind, a ranch sitting low against a hill, solid as something that had been there forever. She stopped walking. This is where he lives, Nathan Cole. The name had lived in her father's voice since she was small, said with a certain weight. The way men say names that carry stories inside them. Her father, Joseph Bennett, had never been a man who said things he didn't mean. When he told Lyra that Nathan Cole was the most loyal person he had ever known, she believed him. When he pressed the letter into her hands 3 days before he died and asked her to go find him if she ever needed help, she promised. She had waited longer than she should have. Pride had kept her in Willow Creek, long past the point where pride made sense. She had taken every small job offered to her, organized a merchant's accounts, helped a widow sort her late husband's ledgers, walked 3 miles each way for work that paid barely enough to eat. It hadn't been enough. Nothing had been enough. The wind shifted. She smelled wood smoke. A light in the ranch window caught the low morning sun and threw it back. Lyra breathed slowly. She was half orc. Her skin was the color of new leaves in spring, a deep, soft green that had followed her through every town, every market, every door that closed before she could knock twice. Her ears curved to soft points. Her eyes were pale green, with a warmth of gold at the center, though few people stayed long enough to notice. She had her mother's face. She had her father's name. Neither had kept her safe these last months. She started walking again. The closer she got to the ranch, the more she noticed the careful, working quality of everything around it. Fences repaired cleanly, ground cleared with intention. A man who did not let things fall apart. She was still 50 yards away when she saw him. He was near the east fence, checking a post. Broad shoulders under a worn canvas coat. Dark hair pulled back. He moved with the economical certainty of someone who had never once rushed, because he never needed to. He looked up, and Lyra felt the last of her careful composure begin to crack. She kept walking anyway, because she was Joseph Bennett's daughter. And Joseph Bennett had raised her to finish what she started, even when her hands were shaking. Nathan straightened slowly, watching her approach. His eyes were pale as winter sky, and they did not look away. Not from her skin, not from her ears, not from the road dust on her coat, or the exhaustion written into every line of her face. He just looked at her, still and serious, like he was already listening. She stopped at the edge of the fence. "My father," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, "said that you needed a wife." Nathan Cole said nothing for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, something closer to recognition. "What was your father's name?" he asked. "Joseph Bennett." The name landed between them like a stone, dropped in still water. Nathan removed his hat, held it against his chest, and looked at her with eyes full of something she could not yet name. Nathan had not spoken Joseph's name aloud in over a year, not because he had forgotten, because some things stay too tender to touch. He had heard, months ago, through the unreliable channels of Willow Creek's gossip, that Joseph had taken ill. He had sent word, a rider with a short letter and a small amount of money tucked inside. He did not know if it had arrived in time. He did not know much at all, except that the woman standing in front of him had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, and she was clearly running out of road. "Come inside," he said. She hesitated. He understood it. A woman alone, travelling to a stranger's property on the basis of a letter. She was measuring him. He would have done the same. "I'll put coffee on," he added simply. "You've walked a long way." She had. He could see it in the way she held herself, straight-backed, deliberate, controlled. But underneath all that intention, there was exhaustion pressed down so deep it had started to become posture. The inside of the cabin was plain and clean, no decoration beyond what was useful. 2 chairs at a heavy oak table, a stone fireplace that had been burning since before dawn, a shelf of ledgers along the back wall that had not been properly organized in longer than Nathan cared to admit. He set the coffee to heat and sat across from her. She put the letter on the table between them. He looked at it without touching it for a moment. The paper was soft from handling. She had held this thing many times. He recognized Joseph's handwriting from across the table before he even reached for it. He read slowly. Joseph's voice came through the words the way it always had, practical, warm, without waste. "Nathan, if my daughter comes to you, she needs help. I know you. You will not turn her away. She is strong and capable and honest. I ask only that you give her the chance to show it. The rest I leave to you both. I owe you nothing. You owe me nothing. I write this only because of who you are." Joseph Nathan set the letter down carefully. He did not speak for a moment. Lyra did not rush him. Good, he thought. She understood silence. That was already something. "He saved my life," Nathan said eventually. 11 years ago. Stone Creek Crossing. I was jumped by 3 men coming back from a supply run. One of them got me bad in the side. Joseph found me on the road, brought me to the nearest settlement, paid for a doctor, stayed until I could ride again. He looked at the letter. He never once mentioned it afterward. Not once. Lyra's expression was careful, but her eyes were soft. She had known her father well enough to believe every word of what Nathan was saying. "He mentioned you," she said quietly. "Often." Nathan had not expected that. He looked at her. "He said you were the most loyal man he knew," she continued. "He said that if something ever happened to him, and I needed help, you were the only person in the territory he would trust completely." The fire crackled. Wind pressed against the window. Nathan looked at the woman across from him. Joseph's daughter, Mara's daughter, 24 years old and alone in the world, sitting in his kitchen with a worn letter and enough dignity to fill a much larger room. "Tell me about your situation," he said. She told him everything. The debts, the boarding house, the failed attempts at work, the dwindling days before Martha's patience ran out. She told it plainly, without drama or self-pity, the way someone tells a story they have already made peace with, even if they haven't solved it yet. She was unlike anyone Nathan had sat across a table from in a long time. "I came because I promised him," she said at the end. "Not because I wanted help. I want you to understand that." "I understand it," Nathan said. He refilled her coffee without asking. Then he sat back down and looked at her honestly. "I have a proposition," he said. Lyra set her cup down. She had spent the last hour watching Nathan Cole the way she had learned to watch people, quietly, from the side, looking for the gap between what someone said and what they meant. She had not found one. That troubled her more than dishonesty would have. "Before I explain," Nathan said, "I want to tell you something first." He leaned forward, forearms on the table. His hands were broad and marked with years of outdoor work, healed cuts, calluses at every grip point, hands that matched the land outside. "People in Willow Creek know my name," he said. "Most of them have heard the story about Stone Creek Crossing. 3 men, 2 shots, 1 survivor. The story got bigger every time someone told it." He paused. "The truth is simpler. I'm not easy to kill, that's all." Lyra said nothing. What people don't say is that I would have died on that road if your father hadn't come along. All the reputation in the world doesn't change that." He picked up the letter again, touched the edge of it lightly with one finger. "Joseph Bennet asked me for one thing in this letter. One thing in 11 years of knowing him." He looked at her directly. "I don't take that lightly." Lyra thought of her father's hands folding that letter, the effort it took him to write those words when breathing was already difficult. She pressed down on the tightening in her throat. "The proposition," she said. "This property runs too large for one person to manage well," Nathan said. "I've been falling behind on accounts, on planning, on 100 small things that add up over time." He nodded at the shelf of ledgers along the wall. "Your father told me, in every letter he ever wrote, that Mara was the reason his business survived, and that you were learning everything she knew." Lyra followed his eyes to the shelf. Even from the table, she could see the disorder, books shelved in no particular order, loose papers tucked in sideways, a system built by someone who understood hard work but had no system at all. Her fingers itched to organize it. "A legal marriage," Nathan said, "a real one registered properly. You would have this property as your home and your legal protection. I would have help managing what I can't manage alone. We split the work according to what each of us does best." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking for anything beyond that. I want to be honest about what this is." Lyra looked at him steadily. "And what is it?" she asked. "A partnership," he said, "between two people who both owed Joseph Bennet something." The fire burned low. The morning had moved past its early hours and settled into something quieter. Outside, the ranch breathed its slow, working breath. She thought about her mother, Mara, an Orc woman who had built her reputation through intelligence and patience and the ability to make complicated things simple, who had been married to a human man in a time when that meant enduring looks and comments and closed doors, and had done it with her head held steady. She thought about her father, Joseph, who had taught her that loyalty was not weakness, that needing help was not shame, that the people worth trusting were the ones who told you the truth even when it cost them something. She thought about the boarding house room she had left that morning, the sound of the walls settling in the cold, the weight of owing money to someone who had already been patient past the point of reason. Nathan was watching her without pressure. He would wait. She understood that. She had one question. "If I agree," she said slowly, "and this doesn't work, if after some time we find that this partnership is a mistake, what happens then?" Nathan considered the question seriously. "Then we figure out a solution that protects you," he said. "I won't leave you worse off than you came." She believed him. She didn't entirely understand why, only that the way he said it was the same way her father had always spoken, quiet and certain, without decoration. "All right," Lyra said. Nathan nodded once. Outside, a hawk crossed the low winter sky. The morning they left for Willow Creek, Nathan wore his cleanest shirt. He had pressed it himself, which took longer than he expected, and came out less smooth than he intended, but he wore it without complaint. Some things deserved a person's best effort, even when that effort was imperfect. Lyra came out of the guest room wearing a dress he had not seen before. It was simple, dark green fabric, worn soft from age, fitted at the waist in a way that suggested it had been made for someone slightly smaller, or made years before the woman who wore it had grown fully into herself. "My mother's," she said, noticing him look. Not defensively, just explaining. "It's a good color," Nathan said. He was not a man given to unnecessary words. But it was true. They rode into Willow Creek as the town was waking, a few early traders moving crates, the smell of bread from the bakery that opened before dawn, dogs crossing the main street at their own unhurried pace. Nathan had not announced any of this. He did not particularly want an audience. Elias Parker, unfortunately, was always awake early. "Nathan Cole," the older man called from the front step of the hardware store, lifting a hand in greeting. His eyes moved to Lyra with honest curiosity and no visible malice. Elias had always been the kind of man who greeted the world the way it came. "Morning, Elias," Nathan said without slowing. "That's a fine day for whatever you're about," Elias called after them cheerfully. Arthur Whitlock's office was at the end of the main street, above the land records office. The judge was already at his desk when they arrived. He was 63 years old, white-haired, and had performed enough marriages in this territory to find nothing particularly remarkable about any combination of people standing in front of him. He read the paperwork Nathan had prepared, looked at both of them over his glasses. "You understand what you're agreeing to," he said. "Not a question. More a final checkpoint." "We do," Nathan said. Lyra said it too. Elias Parker, who had somehow appeared behind them at the door, served as witness without being asked. He signed the papers with a small ceremony that suggested he considered it a privilege. "Good luck to you both," Arthur said. They were husband and wife. The walk back to the horse was quiet, not an uncomfortable quiet, more like the quiet that settles after something large has happened and the world has not yet decided how to arrange itself around it. Lyra held her small bundle of belongings against her side. Her other hand moved to the front of her dress once, touching the place where the letter always rested. It wasn't there anymore. She had left it on the table at the ranch. Nathan noticed. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, after a moment, "It's strange. I promised him I would go to you if I needed help. I kept that promise. And now I feel like I've been holding on to it for so long that I don't quite know what to do without it." "Some promises are meant to be kept and then let go of," he said. Lyra looked at him. He didn't say anything else. She nodded slowly. They rode back to the ranch in the clear morning light. The Willow River caught the sun through the trees and threw pieces of it across the road. The air tasted of pine and cold, and something that might, in time, become familiar. Neither of them spoke much on the way home, but by the time they turned onto the property road, the silence between them had changed its quality, less like the careful quiet between strangers, more like the beginning of something that did not yet have a name. The first week was an exercise in politeness. They moved around each other like two people sharing a map they hadn't drawn together yet. Nathan went about his outdoor work before dawn. Lyra learned the kitchen's logic. They ate meals at the same table and spoke about practical things. Weather, what supplies were running low, which fences had been damaged by the last frost. Lyra did not touch the ledger shelf until the 4th day. She waited until Nathan was outside and then stood in front of it for a long moment, simply looking. The disorder was more complete than she had first estimated. Bills filed behind purchase records, seasonal accounts mixed in with permanent costs, numbers tallied in the margins of pages that were already filled with other numbers. She sat down and began. It took the better part of 2 days. But when she was finished, she had separated everything into clear categories, dated each entry, and identified 3 places where Nathan had been overcharged repeatedly by the same supplier without realizing it. She showed him that evening. Nathan looked at the numbers for a long moment. "How long has that been going on?" he asked. "At least 3 years, she said, "based on what I can trace." He was quiet, the specific expression of a man who had been working hard in the wrong direction and was only now finding out. "My mother did this for merchants all over the region," Lyra said. "She said the problem was never that people were dishonest with their numbers. The problem was they were too busy to look at them." "She sounds like she was remarkable," Nathan said. "She was." Lyra smoothed the edge of a ledger page. "She taught me everything, not as lessons. She just let me sit beside her while she worked. I watched her turn chaos into something legible hundreds of times. She had this way of making the most tangled accounts feel solvable, patient and methodical, like she already knew the answer was in there somewhere and just needed to be found. "And your father?" Lyra smiled. It arrived and departed quickly, but it was real. "He taught me how to talk to people," she said, which turned out to be just as useful. The following week, she put both lessons to use. She rode into Willow Creek alone, met with the overcharging supplier, and returned with better terms and a written contract. Nathan found the new document on the table when he came in for lunch. He read it twice, said nothing at dinner. Then, as he was washing up, he said, "Mara and Joseph both had a hand in you. That's very clear." Lyra looked up from the dish she was drying. "Is that a good thing?" she asked carefully. "Yes," he said. "It is." The cabin changed in small ways over the following days. Not because Lyra rearranged everything. She moved through the space thoughtfully, adjusting only what was genuinely disordered, leaving everything else where Nathan had placed it. A cup had its spot, a coat had its hook. She did not disturb the things that had meaning, even when they made no practical sense. He noticed. He began to notice many things. The way she always made enough coffee for two, the way she sat by the window in the evening with a piece of mending, not idle but resting her mind, the way she would stop sometimes while working outside and look at the river for a long moment, like she was saying something to it privately. One cold morning, she brought coffee out to where he was checking the fence line. They stood together in the early light, the river moving quietly through the frozen grass below. He didn't ask what she was thinking. She didn't ask what he was thinking. They stood there long enough to watch the sun clear the eastern ridge. Then they went back to work. Victoria Ashcroft arrived on a Thursday. Nathan saw the carriage from the field. Dark lacquered wood, a matched pair of horses. He knew that carriage. He had seen it at the edge of his property before, always at a respectful distance, always just long enough to make a point. He put down his tools and walked to the house. Lyra was already watching from the porch. "Do you know who that is?" she asked. "Victoria Ashcroft," Nathan said. "Owns most of the eastern grazing land, has been trying to buy this property for 3 years. Why this property? The river access," he said. "This stretch of the Willow is the best water source between here and the county line. Whoever controls it controls the whole region's irrigation." "And you've refused?" "Every time." Victoria stepped down from the carriage with the particular grace of someone who had never needed to hurry. She was dressed in dark blue with a travelling coat that had cost more than most people in Willow Creek earned in a month. Her hair was perfectly arranged despite the wind. Her smile was applied with the same care. "Mr. Cole," she said, "lovely to see you." Then she turned her eyes to Lyra. Lyra held still. The assessment was slow and thorough and designed to be noticed. Victoria looked at Lyra the way people examined livestock at auction, eyes moving from face to hands to the practical clothes she wore. "I heard you'd recently married," Victoria said to Nathan. "I thought I'd come and pay my respects." "That's kind of you," Nathan said in a tone that did not suggest it was particularly kind. Victoria turned fully toward Lyra. "My dear," she said, with warmth so constructed it had visible seams. "Your husband's situation must have seemed quite appealing, a property this size all to himself." Lyra smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind that does not give anything away. "My husband's property is only part of what makes this place appealing," she said. "The land management has improved considerably. The supply contracts have been renegotiated. The seasonal accounts are now in excellent order." She tilted her head slightly. "It's becoming quite profitable." Victoria's smile held, but something behind her eyes recalculated. "How industrious," she said. She turned back to Nathan. The pleasantry had served its purpose. Now she came to her real point. "I'll be direct, Mr. Cole. My previous offer stands, and I'm prepared to increase it. The land situation on the eastern side is becoming complex. Your position on the river would simplify things considerably." "It would simplify things for you," Nathan said. "The answer is the same as it was the last 3 times." Victoria's expression did not change. But the quality of her stillness changed. "People's circumstances shift," she said pleasantly. "I find that patience is almost always rewarded." She said goodbye with the same applied warmth she had arrived with. The carriage moved back down the road. Nathan watched it until it disappeared around the tree line. "She won't stop," Lyra said. "No," he agreed, "she won't." Lyra was quiet for a moment, working through something internally. He had started to recognize the look. "She's not just negotiating," Lyra said finally. "She's watching, waiting for something to go wrong." Nathan looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because that's what you do," Lyra said simply, "when you can't win by asking." She went back inside. Nathan stood on the porch a moment longer, looking at the empty road. He had the distinct feeling that Lyra had just understood something he hadn't finished thinking yet. The fire started at the edge of sleep. Nathan came awake to the smell before he understood what it was. His body moved before his mind caught up, the way it had trained itself to do after years of living alone in a place where being slow cost things. He was out of bed and at the window in seconds. The cellar barn was burning. Not from the chimney, not from a lantern left burning. The fire was at the base of the south wall, and it was moving with the purposeful speed of fire that has been helped along. He hit the door running. "Lyra!" His voice carried sharp and clean through the cold air. He did not wait to hear her wake. He was already moving for the water barrels by the time she appeared on the porch, taking in the situation with the same speed he had. She did not ask questions. She grabbed the second bucket. The cold was brutal. Their breath came in heavy, visible clouds. The fire had taken the first wall and was reaching for the roof beams. The stored hay fed it with enthusiasm. They worked in near silence, pass and return, water and fire and cold. Nathan's hands went numb within the first 10 minutes. He kept working. Lyra was beside him every step. She did not slow. She did not flinch from the heat or the smoke. Her eyes streamed from the ash in the air, and she kept moving. There was a moment, somewhere in the second half hour, when Nathan thought they were losing. The roof cracked. The eastern frame shifted. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her back from the wall just as the highest beam let go. It came down in a cascade of sparks that spread across the snow and went out one by one in the wet dark. They stood and watched. Then, because there was nothing else to do, they kept working. By the time the fire was fully controlled, the night had moved toward the edge of morning. Half the stored hay was gone. The south wall was a skeleton of blackened beams, but the main structure stood. Lyra sat down in the snow, not collapsing, just choosing to stop for the first time in over an hour. Nathan crouched beside her. Her face was dark with ash. Her hair had come completely loose and hung in heavy waves around her shoulders. She was looking at the ruin of the south wall with the particular expression of someone adding numbers that are coming out wrong. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She looked at her hands, reddened from cold and heat both. "Are you?" "No." She nodded. Then she stood up, moved back to the barn, and crouched near the base of the south wall. "Nathan," she said quietly. He came to stand beside her. She pointed. The snow near the foundation had melted and refrozen in an uneven pattern. A chemical smell came up through the cold when he bent closer. Distinct, familiar. Kerosene. Not the trace smell of a spilled lantern. More than that. Deliberate. He looked at her. "Someone set this fire," she said. He did not argue with her. He stood up and looked at the dark road leading off the property. The wind moved through the damaged beams above them. The river ran quiet and cold beyond the tree line. He thought of a carriage with matched horses. He thought of patience, applied like a weapon. "We'll look more carefully when it's light," he said. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "I know," she said. Neither of them went back to sleep. They found the evidence with the morning. The kerosene trail ran from the south wall to a point 20 feet behind the barn, where the snow had been disturbed by boot prints and something heavy set down and picked back up. A glass bottle from the impression left behind. medium-sized, the kind you could carry inside a coat. Lyra found something else, a carved button, half buried in the disturbed snow. Brass, with a simple pattern on the face that she had seen before, but couldn't immediately place. She turned it over in her fingers while Nathan studied the boot prints. 2 people, he said, one heavier than the other. They came from the east road and left the same way. Lyra looked east. Victoria, she said. I think so, Nathan said, but thinking isn't proof. She kept turning the button over, then it came to her. The man at the feed store, she said, when I renegotiated the supply contract. There was a man who came in toward the end of the conversation. He stood at the back and watched. He was wearing a coat with these buttons. She held it out. Nathan looked at it for a long moment. Cole Granger, he said. He works odd jobs for anyone who pays him, has done errands for Victoria before. He took the button carefully. This is something. Enough? Not by itself, he said, but it's a start. They rode to Willow Creek that afternoon. Lyra had spent the morning gathering every ledger, every land record, every document related to the water rights along the Willow River that she could find among Joseph's papers she had brought with her. She did not know exactly what she was looking for. She brought everything. Daniel Crow listened to them without interrupting. The sheriff was a quiet man who gave each thing he heard the same careful consideration. He looked at the button. He read the notes Lyra had made that morning about the boot prints, the kerosene, the timing. He asked 2 questions. Both were precise. You're certain about the button? He asked Lyra. I'm certain I've seen it before, she said. Whether that's enough is your judgment. He nodded slowly. Cole Granger was found at the Silver Spur Saloon before evening. Nathan and Lyra waited outside Crow's office. An hour passed, then another 20 minutes. Lyra sat on the bench with her hands folded, looking at the main street of Willow Creek with the particular focus of someone keeping their face deliberately still. Nathan sat beside her. How are you holding together? He asked. She considered the question honestly. My father used to say that the hardest part of trouble is waiting for it to become something you can do something about, she said. I understand that now. He said that to me once, Nathan said. She looked at him. He said it to a lot of people, she said, and her voice caught slightly at the end and steadied again. That was Joseph. The office door opened. Crow walked out, and his expression told them before his words did. Granger had confessed. Hired by Victoria Ashcroft to drive Nathan off the property. This was not the first time. There had been other incidents over the past 2 years, smaller ones, that could now be connected. The following days were complicated and thorough. Lyra pulled every land and water rights document she and her father had accumulated. Joseph had been meticulous. He had known years ago that those river rights were contested and had documented everything with the specific foresight of someone building a case for the future. She dismantled Victoria's legal claims 1 page at a time. Victoria left Willow Creek within the week. She sold at a loss and did not say goodbye. The morning after she left, Willow Creek felt different. Or perhaps Lyra had simply stopped bracing for something. She stood at the window of Crow's office signing the final paperwork when she felt Nathan come to stand beside her. She didn't look up, but she stopped, holding her breath. Spring came to the Willow River the way it always had, slowly, then all at once. One morning the frost was still hard on the ground, and 3 days later the south field was soft enough to plant. The grass along the riverbank came back in one long green exhale, as if the land itself had been waiting to start again. The cellar barn had been rebuilt through the winter, beam by beam. Nathan had done most of it. Lyra had helped where she could, passing boards and holding lines and making sure there was always something warm to eat at midday and coffee when the work ran long. They had not talked much during those months. Not because there was nothing to say, because some things settle better in quiet. The accounts were good. The water rights were documented and registered and no longer contested. The supply contracts ran cleanly. The property was, by every measure Lyra knew how to apply, healthy. She was sitting by the river on a morning in early spring, her shoes off despite the cold, watching the water move over the smooth stones. She had been thinking about her mother. About the way Mara used to sit very still when she was working through something important, as if stillness was its own kind of tool. About how her mother had once told her that the best things in life don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, the way spring does, and you only understand what changed when you look back. She heard Nathan's step behind her. He sat down beside her on the bank without asking. He had the letter in his hands. She looked at it. "I found it on the table," he said. "You left it there the day we came back from Willow Creek." "I know," she said. "I left it there on purpose. I thought it was time to let it sit still instead of carrying it." He nodded. He turned the letter over once in his hands. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what your father asked, what he actually asked." "He asked you to take care of me," she said. "He asked me to give you a chance to show what you were," Nathan said. "There's a difference." The river moved. A bird crossed the sky above the far bank, banking once on the wind before disappearing into the tree line. Lyra looked at her hands in her lap, pale green in the early spring light, her mother's hands. She thought of Mara wearing that dark green dress. She thought of her sitting at a merchant's table with her ledger open and her voice calm, turning someone else's disorder into something manageable. She had done that her whole life, made things work, made things last. Lyra had learned that from her. She had not expected to need it here, in this way, for this. "You've more than shown it," Nathan said. "Every day since you walked up that road, every ledger, every negotiation, every morning you brought coffee out to the fence line." He paused. "Every night you stayed up by the barn when the fire was out, but neither of us could sleep." She looked at him. His eyes were the color of winter sky, but they were warm, the way the sky sometimes is in the late afternoon when the light bends and turns everything soft. "I know this started as a practical arrangement," he said. "I want to be honest with you. It stopped being only that for me a long time ago." The words were plain. He had never been a man who dressed things in decoration. She felt the tightening in her chest that she had learned over the last months was not grief, but something entirely different. "A long time ago," she said quietly. "Which moment?" he thought. "The day you came back from renegotiating the supply contract," he said. "You put that document on the table and walked to the window and looked at the river, and you had this expression." He paused, "like you had done something your mother would have approved of." Lyra's throat moved. "She would have," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "Your father would have too." She reached out and took the letter from his hands. She folded it once more along its old lines and held it loosely. "I told myself for months that I had come here only because I promised him," she said, "that I was here out of obligation and practical necessity and nothing else." She looked at the water. "I was not telling myself the truth." Nathan was very still. "I think he knew," she said, "when he wrote that letter. I think he knew that the kind of man who would honor a debt like that, without resentment, without condition, was the kind of man I could learn to trust, and I think he hoped that trust might become something more." She looked at Nathan. "He was right," she said simply. Nathan reached out and covered her hand with his. His hand was warm and steady and calloused and certain. They sat like that for a long time. The river moved past them, the way it had moved for 1,000 years before either of them existed. The new grass bent and recovered in the easy wind. The light moved across the water, breaking into pieces, reassembling downstream. Somewhere behind them, the ranch was warm and solid and organized and alive. The letter rested in her lap. "The rest I leave to you both." Joseph Bennett, she thought, had always known exactly what he was doing. and somewhere beyond the line of things that can be seen or proven. Lyra felt certain that Mara knew it too. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-bound Legacy.